The stars hung silent in the void as the Valkyrie battleship drifted through contested space. Fleet Commander Zethus stood on the bridge, his forearms crossed behind his back in the traditional pose of authority. His species had ruled this sector for 3 generations, and no vessel had ever challenged their dominance. Today would be no different, or so he believed. The sensor officer's voice cut through the quiet hum of the bridge. Commander, unknown vessel detected at grid 749. Distance 40,000 kilometers. Zethus moved to the holographic display, his yellow eyes studying the strange shape that appeared before him. The ship was small, perhaps 1/10 the size of his flagship. Its hull was dark gray, covered in what looked like primitive armor plating. Strange markings decorated its side, symbols in a language the Valkyrie computers couldn't immediately translate. Analysis, Zethus commanded. The tactical officer worked quickly, pulling up data streams across multiple screens. Hull composition appears to be basic titanium alloys with carbon reinforcement. Power signature is unusual. They're using some form of controlled fusion reaction. No energy shields detected. I'm reading multiple weapon ports, but they appear to be projectile-based systems. Zethus felt a wave of disappointment. Another primitive species stumbling into Valkyrie space with outdated technology. He'd hoped for something more interesting to break the monotony of patrol duty. Still, protocols had to be followed. Open a channel. Standard first contact procedures. The communications officer sent out a series of mathematical sequences, the universal language of intelligence, prime numbers, basic equations, attempts to establish common ground. For several minutes, there was no response. Then the unknown ship transmitted back. The same mathematical sequences, but with small variations. They were learning, adapting to the Valkyrie communication style. Interesting, Zethus muttered. They're not completely ignorant. Prepare a full tactical scan. I want to know everything about that vessel. Aboard the human ship USS Defiant, Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair, watching the alien vessel on the main screen. It was massive, easily 15 times larger than his frigate. The design was elegant, all smooth curves and flowing lines. Beautiful, but Jake knew beauty could be deceiving. They're hailing us again, said Lieutenant Amy Foster from the communication station. Same mathematical patterns. Keep responding, Jake said calmly. Let them think we're just another primitive species trying to figure out how to talk to them. Chris, what are you seeing? Lieutenant Chris Parker hunched over his tactical console, his fingers moving rapidly across the controls. They're definitely scanning us, Captain. Deep penetration scan. Very thorough. They're mapping our hull structure, power systems, weapons inventory, even crew positions. Jake nodded slowly. This was exactly what they'd expected. Let them look. Don't block anything. Apollo, are you tracking the scan? A calm, synthetic voice responded from the ship's computer system. Affirmative, Captain. The scanning beam is establishing a 2-way data stream. I am tracing it back to the source vessel and analyzing their network architecture. Good. How long do you need? Approximately 7 minutes for a complete analysis of their primary systems. 12 minutes for their full fleet network if additional vessels are present. Chris looked up from his console. Captain, I'm detecting more ships, lots more. They're positioned in a wide formation around us. I count 63 vessels total, ranging from small patrol craft to 3 ships the size of aircraft carriers. Jake kept his expression neutral, though his pulse quickened. 63 ships. They'd hoped to encounter a small patrol group, maybe a dozen vessels at most. This was an entire battle fleet. He activated his private channel to the communications array, sending a tight beam transmission back toward human space. It would take hours to reach the nearest human outpost, but they needed to send a warning. Amy, keep them talking. Use the math sequences to buy us time. Make mistakes, then correct them. Let them think we're struggling to understand. Amy nodded and began transmitting more mathematical patterns, deliberately introducing small errors that would require the aliens to respond and clarify. It was a delicate dance, appearing cooperative while actually controlling the pace of communication. On the Valkyrie flagship, the scan results were coming in. The tactical officer compiled the data into a comprehensive report, displaying it on the main holographic projector for Zethus to review. The vessel designation translates roughly to Defiant, the tactical officer reported. Crew complement 47 biological life forms. They appear to be carbon-based, oxygen-breathing. Relatively fragile by our standards. The ship's weapons are primitive kinetic accelerators, what we would classify as mass drivers or railguns. Power output is significant for their size, but their defensive capabilities are minimal. Zethus studied the hologram, rotating it to examine the human ship from all angles. The design was crude but functional. Lots of redundant systems which suggested either poor engineering or an expectation that things would break. The power distribution seemed inefficient, with multiple reactors feeding overlapping systems instead of a single optimized network. What about their technology level? Zethus asked. Difficult to assess precisely, Commander. Their fusion reactors are fairly advanced, though not as efficient as ours. Their computer systems use binary processing rather than quantum architecture. Scanning their database now, but it appears they have no faster-than-light communication. They must use physical vessels to carry messages between star systems. A junior officer spoke up hesitantly. Commander, should we be concerned about scanning their systems so thoroughly? Some species consider such actions hostile. Zethus waved a dismissive hand. If they had the capability to stop us, they would have. Their lack of response indicates either ignorance of our scan or inability to prevent it. Either way, they pose no threat. The tactical officer continued his report. I'm detecting biological neural activity consistent with problem solving and communication. They're attempting to understand our mathematical sequences. Progress is slow but steady. Assessment. Moderately intelligent species, early spacefaring stage, no significant military capability. Zethus made his decision. Transmit the scan data to all fleet vessels. I want every ship to have a complete tactical analysis of this vessel. Then move to attack formation Delta 7. We'll disable their engines and take the ship intact. Their primitive biological systems might be worth studying. Throughout the Valkyrie fleet, 63 ships received the complete scan data of the USS Defiant. Every weapon system, every power conduit, every structural weakness was now known to the entire alien armada. It was standard procedure, ensuring that all ships had the same tactical information in case the situation escalated. On the Defiant's bridge, Apollo's voice spoke again. Captain, the scanning process has terminated. I have successfully mapped the alien fleet's network architecture. All 63 vessels are interconnected through a quantum entanglement communication system. They share data instantaneously across their entire formation. Jake leaned forward in his chair. Can you access their network? The scan they performed created a backdoor in their own security protocols. I can insert monitoring programs into their data stream, but I recommend waiting for authorization before taking offensive action. Just monitor for now, Jake ordered. I want to know what they're planning before we make our move. Chris Parker's console beeped urgently. Captain, the alien fleet is changing formation. They're surrounding us. Weapons are powering up across multiple vessels. Time to go loud, Jake said quietly. He opened a channel to the rest of his crew. All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill. Amy, send the full intelligence package to Admiral Carter. Tell her we've made contact and we're about to get very busy. Amy's fingers flew across her console. Message away, Captain. It'll reach the Ranger in 3 minutes. Jake studied the tactical display, watching the alien ships move into position around his small vessel. They were confident, moving slowly and deliberately. They thought they knew everything about the Defiant. They thought they understood what they were facing. They had no idea how wrong they were. Steady, everyone, Jake said calmly. Let them get into position. Let them think they have us trapped. When they make their move, we'll show them what they actually scanned. The Valkyrie fleet completed its encirclement. Zethus gave the order to power weapons and prepare to disable the human vessel. On dozens of ships, targeting systems locked onto the Defiant's engines and weapons. The trap was set. The primitive humans were surrounded by overwhelming force. Fleet Commander Zethus smiled, satisfied with his tactical superiority. The scan had given them everything they needed to know. This would be over in minutes. In his command chair, Captain Jake Morrison smiled too. The aliens had scanned his ship and transmitted the data to their entire fleet. They'd opened their network and let Apollo inside. They'd positioned themselves exactly where human tactical doctrine wanted them. The trap was indeed set, but not the trap the Valkyrie imagined. The first shot came without warning. A brilliant blue beam lanced across the darkness, striking the Defiant's rear quarter where the engine section met the main hull. The ship shuddered but held together. Warning lights flashed across Jake Morrison's console, but the damage was minimal. Hit to Section 7, Chris Parker reported. Hull integrity at 92%. That was a warning shot, Captain. They're trying to disable us, not destroy us. Jake nodded. Good, they still think we're helpless. Apollo, how's our friend doing? The AI's calm voice filled the bridge. I have complete access to the Velkari tactical network. Their fleet coordination system operates on predictable algorithms. Each ship receives targeting instructions based on probability calculations and expected threat assessment. I can predict their firing patterns with 97% accuracy. Then let's dance, Jake said. Helm evasive pattern Morrison 4. Stay ahead of their targeting solutions. The young pilot at the helm station, Ensign Kyle Brooks, grinned and pushed the throttle forward. The Defiant surged ahead, rolling sharply to port just as 3 more energy beams converged on the space where they'd been moments before. The alien weapons were powerful, but they fired where the ship was going to be, not where it was. And Apollo knew where they were aiming before they fired. On the Velkari flagship, confusion rippled through the bridge crew. The human vessel was dodging their weapons with impossible precision. Zethus stared at the tactical display, watching the small ship weave through a coordinated attack that should have crippled it within seconds. How are they avoiding our targeting systems? Zethus demanded. The tactical officer worked frantically at his console. Unknown, Commander. Their maneuvers don't follow any predictable pattern. They're not using standard evasion algorithms. It's as if they know where we're going to fire before we shoot. Impossible, Zethus snapped. Increase firepower. All ships. Concentrated bombardment on my mark. 3 light minutes away, the USS Ranger dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a flash of distorted space. Admiral Helen Carter stood on the flag bridge of the massive carrier, surrounded by holographic displays showing real-time tactical data streaming from the Defiant. We've got 63 hostile contacts, reported Commander Pete Reynolds, Helen's second-in-command. Jake's ship is surrounded but still maneuvering. No major damage reported. Helen studied the battle space carefully. Jake had done exactly what they'd hoped. He'd let the aliens scan his ship, let them think they had all the answers, and in doing so, he'd given Apollo access to their entire fleet network. Now Helen had intelligence data on every alien vessel in the system. How long until they realize we're here? Helen asked. At current scanning ranges, approximately 4 minutes, Pete replied, but their attention is focused on the Defiant. We could cut that down significantly if we move to attack positions now. Helen shook her head. Not yet. Let Jake show them what we can do first. I want these aliens scared before we arrive. Scared enemies make mistakes. On the Defiant, Jake watched his tactical display as the alien fleet prepared for a massive coordinated strike. Dozens of ships were charging their weapons simultaneously, planning to overwhelm his defenses with sheer firepower. It was a textbook maneuver, exactly what the Velkari tactical computer would recommend. Chris, target locks on the flagship and those 2 heavy cruisers flanking it. Apollo, feed targeting data directly to weapons control. Chris's hands moved across his console. Locks acquired, Captain. Railguns charging. We'll be ready to fire in 15 seconds. Amy Foster glanced back from her station. Captain, they're still trying to hail us. Should I respond? Ignore them, Jake said coldly. They shot first. Now we show them why that was a mistake. The Velkari weapons reached full charge. Zethus gave the order to fire. 47 ships unleashed their energy beams simultaneously, creating a web of destructive power that should have vaporized the human vessel instantly. But Apollo had already calculated the firing solutions and Kyle Brooks was already moving. The Defiant Dove rolled and accelerated in a pattern that looked random but was precisely calculated. Energy beams crossed and converged on empty space. A few grazed the hull, scorching armor but causing no critical damage. The human ship emerged from the bombardment battered but intact. Impossible, Zethus roared. No ship can dodge that many simultaneous attacks. His tactical officer's voice was shaking. Commander, the human vessel is returning fire. The Defiant's railguns spoke, not with the bright flash of energy weapons, but with the invisible speed of solid projectiles accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. 3 tungsten rounds, each weighing 50 kilograms, crossed the distance to the Velkari flagship in less than a second. The Velkari shields were sophisticated, designed to deflect or absorb energy-based weapons. They could handle plasma beams, particle accelerators, and nuclear explosions. They were completely unprepared for solid matter moving at relativistic velocities. The first round punched through the flagship's shield as if it didn't exist, striking the ship's forward weapons array. The kinetic energy was so immense that the impact point simply vaporized, sending a shock wave through the entire vessel. The second round hit amidships, penetrating deep into the hull before its momentum was finally arrested by hitting the ship's main power reactor containment. The third round struck the engine section, crippling the ship's maneuvering capability. Zethus was thrown from his feet as the flagship shuddered. Alarms screamed throughout the bridge. Emergency lighting flickered as main power failed. Through the chaos, he heard his crew shouting damage reports. Forward weapons offline. Hull breaches on decks 4 through 9. Main reactor containment failing. Emergency power only! But the Defiant wasn't finished. Chris Parker had already shifted targets to the 2 heavy cruisers. More railgun rounds flew through space, and 2 more Valkyrie ships were crippled in seconds. Their shields, so effective against energy weapons, might as well have been made of paper. All ships return fire. Zethus screamed into the fleet channel. Target the human vessel with everything we have. The Valkyrie fleet erupted with weapons fire. Dozens of energy beams converged on the Defiant from every direction. This time there was no escape. Even with Apollo's predictions, there were simply too many attacks coming too fast. But Jake had expected this. Brace for impact, he called out. The beams struck home, overwhelming the Defiant's defensive systems. Armor plating melted under the sustained assault. Hull breaches opened on 3 decks. The ship's environmental systems struggled to contain the damage. Hull integrity down to 61%, Chris reported through gritted teeth. Port weapons offline. We've got casualties in engineering. Did we survive it? Jake asked. Yes, sir, barely. Then we've already won. Amy, send the signal to Admiral Carter. 2 words. Come now. The message flashed across space at the speed of light. Aboard the Ranger, Helen Carter received it with a grim smile. All ships execute attack pattern Carter Alpha. Let's show these aliens what a real fleet engagement looks like. Pete, you have tactical command. I want precise coordination between all battle groups. The human fleet materialized from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. 26 ships ranging from small frigates to 3 heavy carriers dropped into real space behind the Valkyrie fleet. The aliens had been so focused on the Defiant that they'd never thought to scan for other vessels in the area. Pete Reynolds coordinated the attack from his tactical station. Battle Group 1, target their left flank. Battle Group 2, take the right. Battle Group 3, drive straight through their center. Fighter wings, launch now. The human fleet moved with coordinated precision, but not the rigid coordination of computer-controlled movements. Each ship's captain had their orders, but also the freedom to adapt and improvise. They moved like a school of fish, each individual responding to the others while maintaining overall cohesion. The Valkyrie fleet tried to respond, but they were caught completely off guard. Their formation, optimized for surrounding a single target, was vulnerable from behind. Their tactical computers struggled to recalculate firing solutions as new threats appeared from unexpected directions. Chris Parker watched his sensors light up with new contacts. Captain, the cavalry has arrived. 26 human ships just dropped in behind the alien fleet. Jake allowed himself a small smile. Good! Helm, get us out of the kill zone! Fall back and let the big ships handle this. The Defiant limped away from the center of the battle, smoke trailing from its damaged sections. Jake had played his part. He'd let the aliens scan his ship, let them think they understood everything. He'd shown them that kinetic weapons could defeat their shields. He'd bought time for the main fleet to arrive. Now it was Admiral Carter's turn to show the Valkyrie what happened when you underestimated humanity. On the crippled Valkyrie flagship, Zethus struggled to understand what was happening. His fleet had been ambushed. His superior numbers meant nothing when his ships were out of position, and his tactical computers couldn't predict the enemy's movements. He pulled himself to his feet and stared at the tactical display. The human fleet was tearing through his formation like a blade through cloth. Their weapons, primitive kinetic accelerators according to the scan data, were. The battle raged across thousands of kilometers of space. Energy beams and solid projectiles crossed paths in a deadly dance of light and darkness. The Valkyrie fleet, still trying to reform their lines, fired frantically at targets that refused to behave according to their tactical predictions. Aboard the USS Ranger, Commander Pete Reynolds orchestrated the attack with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent 20 years studying military history. His console displayed all 26 human ships, each one a moving point of light executing his orders in their own unique way. Battle Group 1 reports 3 enemy destroyers disabled, reported the tactical coordinator. Battle Group 2 is engaging their carrier group. Battle Group 3 has penetrated their formation and is causing chaos in their rear positions. Pete nodded approvingly. Tell Group 1 to press their advantage. Group 2, break off and reposition. Don't let them predict our movements. Group 3, continue pushing through. I want them confused about where our main thrust is coming. Admiral Helen Carter watched the battle unfold with quiet intensity. She'd fought in a dozen engagements during her 30-year career, but never against an opponent with such advanced technology. The Valkyrie ships were powerful, their weapons devastating. If this battle came down to a straight comparison of firepower and defenses, humanity would lose. But battles were never that simple. Launch the fighter wings, Helen ordered, all 3 carrier groups. I want 200 birds in space within 5 minutes. Throughout the human fleet, launch bays opened. Small single-pilot fighters screamed into the void, their engines blazing bright against the darkness. Lieutenant Dan Foster led the first squadron away from the Ranger, his hands steady on the controls despite his racing heart. All wings, this is Foster. Remember your training. These aliens think in straight lines and predictable patterns. We're going to show them what chaos looks like. Break formation on my mark. 3, 2, 1, break. The neat formation of human fighters exploded outward like shrapnel from a bomb. Each pilot chose their own vector, their own target, their own approach. To the Valkyrie tactical computers, it looked like complete disorder. Their point defense systems tried to track the incoming fighters but couldn't establish firing solutions. The humans weren't flying in any recognizable attack pattern, because there was no pattern. Each pilot was making their own decisions, adapting to the battle as it unfolded around them. Dan Foster dove toward a Valkyrie cruiser, his weapons locked on its sensor array. Behind him, 3 other fighters followed, not because they'd been ordered to, but because they saw the same opportunity he did. The cruiser's defensive turrets swiveled toward them, but the targeting computer was designed to intercept orderly formations, not individual ships moving erratically. Dan fired his missiles, rolled hard to starboard and accelerated away. 2 missiles struck the sensor array, blinding the cruiser. The 3 fighters behind him exploited the confusion, strafing the ship's weapons ports with their railguns. Within seconds, one of the Valkyrie fleet's heavy cruisers was reduced to a floating wreck, unable to see or shoot. On the Valkyrie flagship, Zethus watched his fleet falling apart. Ships reported damage faster than his crew could track it. The human fighters were everywhere, striking from impossible angles. His point defense systems had been designed to protect against orderly missile salvos and bomber formations, not this swarm of independent attackers. Get our fighters in space, Zethus ordered desperately. His tactical officer shook his head. Commander, our fighters are automated drones. They need clear target designation and attack vectors. In this chaos, our control computers can't establish proper coordination. Zethus felt cold realization wash over him. The Valkyrie had automated their fighters for efficiency. Drones were cheaper than training pilots, more expendable, and could pull maneuvers that would kill biological beings. But drones needed instructions. They needed clear commands and predictable enemies. The humans were neither clear nor predictable. Aboard the Defiant, now safely behind the main battle line, Chris Parker made a discovery. The ship's sensors had recovered enough functionality to resume scanning, and Apollo had continued its infiltration of the Valkyrie network. Captain, Chris said excitedly, Apollo's found something. The Valkyrie ships are all networked together. When one ship learns something, they all learn it instantly through quantum communication. Jake leaned forward. That's a massive tactical advantage. Real-time information sharing across the entire fleet. Yes, sir. But it's also a vulnerability. If we can inject false data into their network, they'll all see it. We could make them see targets that don't exist. Jake's eyes lit up. Apollo, can you do that? The AI responded immediately. Affirmative, Captain. I can introduce false sensor data into their tactical network. However, the Valkyrie computers will eventually recognize the deception and purge the false information. Estimated effectiveness 8 to 12 minutes before countermeasures take effect. Do it, Jake ordered. Make them see human ships where we aren't, and Chris, send this to Admiral Carter. She needs to know what we're doing. Apollo began its work. False sensor ghosts appeared throughout the Valkyrie network. Phantom human ships materialized on sensors, appearing to attack from directions where no actual vessels existed. The Valkyrie tactical computers, trusting their networked data, directed ships to engage these ghosts. Energy beams lanced through empty space, hitting nothing. Missiles chased sensor returns that didn't correspond to physical ships. Valkyrie vessels maneuvered frantically to avoid attacks that were never coming, leaving themselves exposed to actual human ships firing from different positions. On one Valkyrie destroyer, the captain ordered his weapons to fire at a phantom human frigate that appeared to be charging directly at his position. His energy beams hit another Valkyrie ship that had the misfortune of being in the line of fire. The confused destroyer captain watched his sensors show a hit on the human ship, while his actual weapons had just crippled one of his own fleet's vessels. Chaos spread through the Valkyrie formation. Ships fired at ghosts and hit their own allies. Captains shouted contradictory orders as their sensors showed threats from every direction. The carefully coordinated fleet dissolved into a confused mass of ships shooting at shadows. Helen Carter recognized the opportunity immediately. "Pete, the enemy formation is collapsing. Press the attack. All battle groups focus fire on their command ships. Let's cut off their coordination completely." The human fleet concentrated its firepower on the Valkyrie flagships and carriers. These massive vessels were powerful but slow, designed to direct fleet operations rather than engage in direct combat. Without mobility and with their shields useless against kinetic weapons, they were vulnerable. One by one, the Valkyrie command ships were crippled. Each time a flagship went dark, a section of the Valkyrie fleet lost coordination. The surviving ships, their network compromised by false data, and their command structure shattered, began operating independently, and independent Valkyrie ships programmed to follow tactical doctrine were predictable. Predictable enemies died quickly. Jake Morrison made a decision. The Defiant was damaged but still operational. Her weapons were partially functional, and Jake knew that sometimes the best way to win a battle was to hit the enemy where they weren't looking. Helm, plot a course to that disabled Valkyrie cruiser at grid 372, the one our fighters blinded. Amy, get me a boarding party. 20 Marines, full combat gear. Chris, you're coming with me. I want to see their ship from the inside. Chris looked up in surprise. Sir, we're in the middle of a battle. Is boarding action really necessary? Not necessary, Jake admitted, but informative. These aliens scanned us to learn our weaknesses. Time we returned the favor. Besides, I want them to know that humans don't just fight with ships and weapons. We'll fight hand to hand if we have to. The Defiant limped toward the blinded cruiser, using its maneuvering thrusters to avoid the worst of the battle. The Valkyrie vessel hung dead in space, its sensor array destroyed and its weapons silent. Perfect for a boarding action. Sergeant Lisa Grant assembled the Marine boarding party in the Defiant's airlock. She was a compact woman with steel gray eyes and 20 years of combat experience. Her Marines were young, most of them on their first deep space deployment, but they were trained and ready. Listen up, Lisa barked. We don't know what we're going to find on that alien ship. Could be hostile crew, could be automated defenses, could be nothing but dead bodies. Stay sharp, watch your corners, and remember your training. We're not here to kill anyone unless they shoot first. Our job is reconnaissance and possibly taking prisoners. Questions? One young Marine raised his hand. Sergeant, what if they're physically stronger than us? Lisa smiled grimly. Then we shoot them. That's what guns are for, son. Strength doesn't mean much when you're dodging bullets. The Defiant attached to the Valkyrie cruiser with magnetic docking clamps. Cutting torches burned through the alien hull, opening a breach into the ship's interior. The boarding party moved through in textbook formation, weapons ready, moving quickly but carefully through the alien corridors. The interior of the Valkyrie ship was strange. The corridors were wide and tall, designed for beings larger than humans. The lighting was dim and the emergency lighting in the Valkyrie flagship cast strange shadows across Fleet Commander Zethus's face. Around him, his bridge crew worked frantically at backup stations trying to maintain control of a battle that had already been lost. The main holographic display flickered with corrupted data, showing human ships that might be real or might be ghosts planted by their AI. Fleet status, Zethus demanded, his voice hoarse from shouting orders over the past hour. The tactical officer consulted his damaged console. 19 ships remain combat-capable, Commander. 7 are attempting to retreat, but are being pursued by human fighters. 15 ships are crippled or destroyed. The rest have surrendered or lost all power. 19 ships, from 63. Zethus had commanded the largest battle fleet in this sector, and it had been torn apart by a smaller force with supposedly inferior technology. The scan had told them everything about the human ships, everything except what mattered. A young officer named Korthas approached cautiously. He was from the Strategic Planning Division, not typically involved in active combat operations, but desperate times called for unconventional thinking. "Commander, I request permission to speak," Korthas said, his forearms held in a gesture of respect. Zethus waved tiredly. "Speak. At this point I'll listen to anyone." "I've been analyzing the battle data," Korthas began. "The humans fight in a way our tactical computers cannot predict. They use planned strategies combined with spontaneous adaptation. Each ship captain makes independent decisions while somehow maintaining overall coordination." "I know that," Zethus snapped. "Tell me something useful," Korthas continued steadily. "Our computers predict enemy actions based on tactical analysis. We calculate the most efficient response and execute it. The humans counter this by being inefficient. They don't always take the optimal action because they know we expect the optimal action." Zethus stared at the young officer. "You're saying they win by making poor tactical decisions?" "No, Commander. I'm saying they win by making unexpected decisions. To defeat them, we must also become unpredictable. I propose we let our automated systems choose targets and maneuvers using quantum probability, rather than tactical optimization, pure randomness. If we can't predict what we'll do, neither can they." It was desperate. It went against every principle of Velkhari military doctrine, but Zethus was watching his fleet die following doctrine. Perhaps it was time to abandon it. "Implement it," Zethus ordered. "Fleet-wide. Maybe chaos will serve us better than order." Throughout the remaining Velkhari ships, tactical computers were reprogrammed. Instead of calculating optimal firing solutions, they began choosing targets randomly. Instead of executing efficient maneuvers, they moved unpredictably. The Velkhari fleet transformed from a coordinated fighting force into a collection of ships doing random, nonsensical things. Aboard the Ranger, Pete Reynolds noticed the change immediately. "Admiral, the enemy is changing tactics. Their movements no longer follow any logical pattern. They're firing at random targets, maneuvering without clear purpose." Helen Carter frowned at her tactical display. "Apollo's predictions?" "Dropping significantly," Pete reported. "The AI can still tell us where they are, but not what they'll do next. It's like they've abandoned their tactical computer guidance entirely." Helen considered the situation. "All ships, defensive posture. Fall back to safe distance and observe. I want to see what they're trying to do." The human fleet pulled back, creating space between themselves and the erratically moving Velkhari vessels. For a brief moment, the Velkhari randomness seemed effective. Human ships took unexpected hits as Velkhari weapons fired in unpredictable directions. Fighter wings had to break off attacks as their targets moved without warning. Jake Morrison, still aboard the captured Velkhari cruiser, received the tactical update from the Defiant. He studied the data with Chris Parker looking over his shoulder. "They've abandoned their computers," Chris observed. "They're just doing random things now." Jake nodded slowly. "Interesting approach. Can't predict randomness, but randomness cuts both ways. Let's watch and see how long they can maintain it." The answer came quickly. Random movements meant Velkhari ships no longer coordinated with each other. Two destroyers attempting random evasive maneuvers collided, crippling both vessels. A cruiser firing at random targets accidentally hit 3 of its own ships. Another vessel executed a random engine burn that sent it tumbling out of control. Chaos was a strategy, but only if you could harness it. The Velkhari were simply creating disorder, and disorder killed you just as effectively as enemy fire. Within 20 minutes, 3 more Velkhari ships were disabled by their own random actions. Fuel reserves ran dangerously low, as ships burned their engines executing purposeless maneuvers. Ammunition was exhausted firing at targets that made no strategic sense. The fleet that had been deadly minutes ago became a danger only to itself. "They're falling apart," Pete Reynolds reported to Helen. "Random tactics are causing more damage to them than we were. Several ships have collided or depleted their fuel reserves." Helen made her decision. "Open a channel to their flagship. Wide broadcast to their entire fleet. Let's see if they're ready to talk." The communication officer worked quickly. "Channel open, Admiral." Helen spoke clearly, her voice transmitted to every surviving Velkhari vessel. "Velkhari Fleet Commander, this is Admiral Helen Carter of the Human Defense Fleet. Your tactical situation is hopeless. You've lost more than 2/3 of your ships. Your random maneuvers are causing more damage than our weapons. I'm offering you one chance to surrender with honor. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Any ship that refuses will be destroyed. You have 5 minutes to respond." On the Valkyrie flagship, Zethus listened to the transmission with growing despair. The human admiral was right. His randomness strategy had failed spectacularly. His fleet was destroying itself more effectively than the humans had. Korthus spoke quietly. "Commander, we've lost. Continuing to fight will only result in more deaths." Zethus looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were exhausted, scared, and looking to him for leadership. He'd led them into this disaster through his arrogance. He'd scanned the human ship and assumed that knowledge meant victory. He'd been so terribly wrong. "Open a return channel," Zethus said heavily. "All ships cease fire and power down weapons. Broadcast surrender on all frequencies." Helen Carter received the surrender notification with quiet satisfaction. "All human ships cease offensive operations. Maintain defensive positions. Pete, coordinate boarding parties for the larger vessels. I want their weapons and engines secured." The battle was over. What remained of the Valkyrie fleet hung dead in space, surrounded by human ships and fighters. 63 vessels had arrived expecting an easy victory over a primitive species. 19 remained operational. The rest were debris, wrecks, or disabled hulks. The cost had been high for humanity as well. 3 frigates destroyed, 2 more critically damaged. Casualty reports were still coming in, but initial numbers suggested over 200 dead and 3 times that many wounded. The Defiant, despite its heroic stand, would need months of repairs, but humanity had won. Against superior numbers and more advanced technology, human creativity and adaptability had prevailed. Jake Morrison led his boarding party back to the Defiant, bringing with them captured Valkyrie crew members and valuable data extracted from the cruiser's computers. Chris Parker carried storage devices filled with information about Valkyrie technology, tactics, and fleet organization. "Captain," Chris said as they crossed back through the airlock, "I found something interesting in their database. This wasn't just a random patrol fleet. They were specifically sent to this region to intercept and capture any unknown vessels. We weren't an accident. They were hunting for new species to conquer." Jake's expression darkened. "Then they found one. Just not the helpless species they expected. Get that data to Admiral Carter immediately. She needs to know this was deliberate." Aboard the Ranger, Helen reviewed the captured data with growing concern. The Valkyrie Dominion had expanded across 17 star systems by conquering less advanced species. They would scan new vessels, assess their technology, and if the species seemed primitive enough, they would attack and conquer. It was a successful strategy. Until they met humans. Helen looked out at the debris field where the battle had taken place. Pieces of ships, both human and Valkyrie, tumbled through space. Good people had died today. On both sides, soldiers had followed orders, fought bravely, and paid the ultimate price. "Get me a secure channel to Earth Command," Helen ordered. "They need to know what we've learned. The Valkyrie aren't just one fleet. They're an empire, and we just destroyed one of their battle groups. They're going to notice." Pete Reynolds understood the implication. "You think they'll send more ships?" "I know they will," Helen replied. "This battle was just the beginning. We showed them that humans can't be easily defeated. Some species would respect that and open diplomatic channels. But conquerors? They'll just send a bigger fleet next time." Fleet Commander Zethus was brought aboard the Ranger under guard. He stood before Helen Carter in the Admiral's conference room, his forearms bound, his proud bearing broken by defeat. Human Marines flanked him, weapons ready but not pointed directly at him. 3 weeks after the battle, a diplomatic station was established in neutral space between human and Valkyrie territories. The structure was temporary, assembled quickly from modular components, but it served its purpose. Representatives from both species needed to talk, and neither wanted those talks to happen on their home territory. Admiral Helen Carter arrived first, her shuttle docking with the station under the watchful eyes of a dozen human warships, positioned a safe distance away. She wore her full-dress uniform, medals gleaming on her chest. Behind her walked Commander Pete Reynolds and Captain Jake Morrison, both also in formal attire. Fleet Commander Zethus arrived an hour later. He came alone, without guards or attendants, a significant gesture of trust or perhaps humiliation. His forearms hung at his sides, and his once proud bearing was diminished by the weight of his defeat. The Velkari government had not executed him for his failure, but they had stripped him of his fleet command. He now served as a special envoy, his punishment being to face the species that had destroyed his armada. They met in a conference room designed to accommodate both species. The furniture was adjustable, the gravity set to a compromise between human and Velkari comfort. Holographic displays lined the walls ready to show tactical data, but for now they remained dark. Helen spoke first. "Commander Zethus, thank you for agreeing to meet. I understand this isn't easy for you." Zethus made a gesture that his translator identified as resigned acknowledgement. "My government gave me little choice, Admiral. They want to understand how we lost so completely. They want to know if humanity poses a threat to the Dominion. And what will you tell them?" Helen asked. "The truth," Zethus replied, "that we underestimated you. That our scan gave us tactical data, but not strategic understanding. That we fought the battle we expected rather than the battle that actually occurred." Pete Reynolds leaned forward. "With respect, Commander, that's not enough. Your government needs to understand why you lost, not just that you lost. They need to understand the fundamental difference between how your species fights and how humans fight." Zethus's yellow eyes studied the human commander. "Then explain it to me. In the weeks since my defeat, I've reviewed the battle data countless times. I still don't fully understand how you defeated us. Our ships were more powerful, our weapons more advanced, our numbers superior. Yet you destroyed us with apparent ease," Jake Morrison spoke up. "It wasn't easy, Commander. We lost 3 ships and over 200 crew. Many more were wounded. We won, yes, but we paid a price for that victory." "But you did win," Zethus insisted. "How?" Helen stood and walked to one of the holographic displays. She activated it, showing a replay of the battle. "Let me show you. Here, at the beginning, you scan the Defiant. Your computers map every system, every weapon, every crew member. You transmit this data to your entire fleet. Standard procedure for your military." Zethus nodded. "Proper tactical preparation. Except you made 3 critical errors," Helen continued. "First, you assumed that knowing what we had meant, you understood what we'd do. Second, you networked your entire fleet together, which gave our AI access to all 63 ships when you scanned just 1. Third, you assumed that biological crews were a weakness rather than a strength. The holographic display zoomed in on the moment when the Defiant first evaded the Velkari weapons. "Watch here. Your ships fire based on probability calculations. Your computers predict where our ship will be and shoot at that location. But Apollo, our AI, had access to your targeting systems. We knew where you'd shoot before you fired." Zethus watched the replay with growing understanding. "So you simply avoided those locations?" "Exactly," Pete confirmed. "Your tactics were optimal from a mathematical perspective. But optimal tactics become predictable tactics, and predictable tactics are vulnerable to anyone who can predict them." The display showed the moment when the Defiant's railguns first fired. "Here's where your shields failed," Helen explained. "Your defensive systems were designed for energy weapons. Plasma beams, particle accelerators, nuclear warheads. Your shields could handle all of those, but we used solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. Your shields couldn't stop mass with momentum." "We knew you had kinetic weapons," Zethus protested. "The scan showed us." "You knew we had them," Jake agreed. "But you didn't test your shields against them. You assumed that any species still using kinetic weapons must be primitive, and therefore those weapons must be ineffective. You never considered that we might use kinetic weapons because they're effective against shields designed to stop energy." The display shifted to show the human fighters swarming through the Velkari fleet. "And here's where your automation failed you," Helen continued. "Your point defense systems were designed to intercept orderly formations. Your fighter drones operated according to programmed tactics. But our pilots are biological beings making independent decisions. They don't follow formation. They don't execute pre-programmed maneuvers. Each pilot adapts to the situation in real time." Zethus studied the chaotic movement of human fighters. "It looks disorganized." "It is disorganized," Pete said with a slight smile. "That's the point. Chaos is a weapon when your enemy expects order. Your computers couldn't predict our actions because we weren't following any algorithm. We were improvising." The display showed the moment when Velkari ships began firing at ghost targets. "And here's where your networked fleet became a liability," Helen explained. "Your quantum communication system shares data instantaneously across all ships. It's incredibly efficient. But when we injected false data into that network, every ship saw the same false information. You couldn't verify what was real because your own sensors were telling you the ghosts were real. We eventually realized the data was compromised, Zethis said defensively. We attempted to purge the false information, by which time your formation was already broken, Jake pointed out. You'd wasted ammunition on phantom targets and left yourselves exposed to real ones. Even after you fixed the data corruption, you couldn't recover your tactical position. The display showed the final moments of the battle, when the Velkari fleet attempted random maneuvers. And this, Helen said quietly, was when you truly lost. You abandoned your tactical computers entirely and tried to fight with randomness. But randomness requires chaos management. We humans are good at chaos. We evolved in chaos. Our planet Earth had unpredictable weather, dangerous predators, rival tribes, diseases. We learned to thrive in uncertain environments. Your species, I suspect, had a different evolutionary path. Zethis was silent for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. The Velkari homeworld is stable, predictable. Our ancestors didn't face random threats. They faced challenges that could be analyzed and solved through planning and preparation. We built our entire civilization on optimization and efficiency. Which works perfectly, Helen acknowledged, until you face an opponent who thrives on inefficiency. Commander, your empire has conquered 17 systems. I'm guessing all of those species were similar to you. They fought according to tactical doctrine. They used technology in logical ways. They could be predicted and therefore defeated. But humans are different, Zethis said slowly, understanding dawning. We're chaos made flesh, Jake said with dark humor. We build redundant systems because we expect things to break. We train biological pilots because they can improvise. We use simple weapons because simple weapons are reliable. We don't optimize for the battle we plan to fight. We prepare for the battle that goes completely wrong. Pete pulled up additional data on the display. We've been studying the information we captured from your ships. Your military history shows consistent success against opponents who fought like you, but you've never encountered a species that deliberately embraces tactical uncertainty. Your doctrine has no answer for it. Zethis absorbed this information with the expression of someone whose entire worldview was shifting. You're saying my empire is vulnerable to any species that fights with chaos rather than order. Not just any species, Helen corrected. Most civilizations, as they advance, tend toward greater organization and efficiency. They develop AI systems to optimize tactics. They automate ship functions to reduce crew requirements. They standardize weapons and defenses, all of which makes sense from an engineering perspective. But it also makes them predictable. Humans haven't followed that path? Zethis asked. Oh, we tried, Jake said with a grin. We built automated ships and AI tactical systems. We had computer-controlled fighters and optimized formations. But we kept running into a problem. Every time we tested our automated systems against human-crewed ships in training exercises, the humans won. Not always, but often enough that we realized optimization had a hidden cost. It made us predictable to ourselves, which meant we'd be predictable to any enemy who studied us. Helen brought up a new display showing human military doctrine. So we made a deliberate choice. We keep our AI systems, but we don't let them make tactical decisions. We automate ship functions, but we always have manual overrides. We train pilots instead of using drones because pilots can think creatively. We maintain weapons diversity instead of standardizing on the most efficient option. It makes our military less optimal by any mathematical measure, but it makes us much harder.